In my last video, I ranked a bunch of old Nick Jr. shows, and you should really go watch it, because from the look of it, not many of you have.
Wah, wah, wah.
Though that could have something to do with the fact that sometime after it went public, I got a copyright claim from the creators of Dino Dan. But what else is new? Anyways, one of the shows was Max and Ruby, and I mentioned how the parents were always absent in that show, resulting in a multitude of theories on their whereabouts. But I didn't go in depth since it would have ruined the pacing. Well, now I'm here to make a full video about them and what might become a recurrent segment on this channel. We'll see. Today I'll finally be answering one of the biggest questions in kids TV history. Where are Max and Ruby's parents? Now, the first question we have to ask is, what is Max and Ruby? Max and Ruby started off as a series of 44 children's books written by Rosemary Wells, released over a span of 30 years, with the first book being published in 1979 and the latest being published in 2009. Though these series seem to focus more on the cartoon adaptation by Nelvana, which aired on Treehouse TV in Canada and Nick Jr. in the States. It stars two bunny siblings, the 3.5-year-old Max, who, you know what, I'll just let my past self explain it.
Was the little brother, and he was 3 years old, and he couldn't speak full sentences. And in every episode, he'd usually stick his nose into his older sister's business and come up with some crazy scheme. And usually Ruby would be like, "No, Max, don't do that, Max, go do something else, Max."
One thing that's odd about this show is that we never see Max and Ruby's parents, and it seems like they live on their own. Except, this isn't actually that weird. There are many kid shows, especially for young kids, where the parents are completely absent for no explained reason. Heck, I even mentioned this in my tier list video.
Next we have Maggie and the Ferocious Beast, which is the show about this little orphan girl named Maggie. Yeah, we got a lot of orphans in these shows, a lot of absent parents. Max and Ruby, their parents are never around. Toon Puddle's parents are never around. Wubbsy's parents don't exist. The parents of the Lazy Town kids are never there. Pokeo doesn't seem to have parents. Unless you count the narrator. Tommy and Tallulah don't have any parents. Pretty depressing.
So why is it only Max and Ruby that people are always asking about? Well, I'm sure it has something to do with the show's popularity. Let's just compare the longevity of Max and Ruby to those other shows I mentioned in the video. Toon Puddle lasted from 2008 to 2009 for 1 season and 26 episodes. Maggie and the Ferocious Beast lasted from 2000 to 2002 for 3 seasons and 39 episodes. Wow Wow Wubbsy lasted from 2006 to 2010 for 2 seasons and 52 episodes. Lazy Town lasted from 2004 to 2007 for 2 seasons before going on a 6-year hiatus until returning from 2013 to 2014, and then with a total of 4 seasons and 78 episodes. Max and Ruby lasted from 2002 to 2020 for 7 seasons and 130 episodes. As you can see, Max and Ruby had a much longer run than these other shows, and so it can be assumed it was also more popular, meaning more people who would have seen it and liked it as kids and would now be discussing it online. When you combine that with a portrait on the wall clearly showing that their parents were there at some point, and that we see Ruby having to take care of her brother, with the idea of a 7-year-old having to take care of her 3.5-year-old brother all by herself being super depressing, and they frequently visit or get visited by their grandma, yet she doesn't fully take care of them. And hold on, Max is 3.5 years old, yet he can't speak full sentences?
Max, hurry up! We have to go now! Stay home!
It opens the door for some wild conspiracies. So, let's explore them, shall we? Now, the most boring answer to this mystery is that this was simply an artistic decision. In an interview with Nick Jr., Rosemary Wells is asked to describe Max and Ruby's relationship, and at one point brings up the topic of Max and Ruby's parents.
As in most other classic stories, we don't see Max and Ruby's parents, because I believe that kids resolve their issues and conflicts differently when they are on their own. The television series gives kids a sense about how these two siblings resolve their conflicts in a humorous and entertaining way.
So yeah, there was no deep reason behind it, it was just done to keep the focus on Max and Ruby. But this is just an out-of-universe explanation. This doesn't actually explain the in-universe reason we never see their parents. So sorry Rosemary, but your answer just isn't good enough. For our real answer, we're gonna have to dig a bit deeper. Crap, are those portraits of Max and Ruby's parents? And an urn between them, which is typically used to store the ashes of a cremated person? Does that mean that they're dead and that's where Max and Ruby keep their ashes? Maybe they got killed by predators, or maybe Max killed them. He seems like he'd do that. Or maybe Ruby killed them. She seems like she'd do that. Or maybe Grandma killed them. She seems like she'd do that. Or maybe it's in a post-apocalyptic future where the parents are dead. Or maybe the parents killed themselves because they're tired of dealing with these brats. This theory is actually addressed in the terrible creepypasta Max and Ruby 0004. Max and Ruby were playing tag in the garden, and their parents were on the porch, watching them play. However, something was off. The sound was playing in reverse, and the parents' faces were that of sadness. It panned to the mother and father, and in a voice of deep sorrow the father spoke. "It's such a shame," he sighed. It then cut short to the sound of static and a loud scream, followed by the sound of two people choking. The sounds felt so real, it made me almost physically sick. The scene then switched to Max and Ruby standing in front of what looked like a gravestone labeled, "Rip Mommy and Daddy." Spooky, I know. This creepypasta was originally on the regular creepypasta wiki. It must have been deemed terrible even by normal creepypasta standards, because it can now only be found on the Trollpasta wiki and the Gyoshi's Lost Episodes wiki, which features other terrible lost episode creepypastas, including other ones about Max and Ruby, including one called Ruby's Anger. It's unremarkable, just about some dude who buys a Max and Ruby DVD which ends up containing some creepy lost episode where Ruby kills Max. But the ending to this story is really something. I emailed Rosemary Wells about it and the only reply I got was this.
"Hello there. If you watch my tape, then you'll know that I recently killed my little brother. Don't email me again. And if you do, I will stab you in the head in your sleep. Don't email this account ever again. Ruby!"
And of course, I have to mention this incredibly dark meme, which you might have noticed I actually briefly showed in my tier list video. This meme also tries to explain the other big mystery of the show. Why doesn't Max talk? 12 years after it was first aired, the producers of Max and Ruby have finally announced the psychological aspect behind it. The reason why there are no parents is because they died in a car accident on their way to picking Ruby up from Bunny Scouts. Max was in the car at the time and survived, but suffers from serious brain injuries. Hence the reason why he always messes up in the show, and Ruby is the mother figure and has to look after him and fix the problems. Max is mute because their grandma molested him at a young age, and he is so traumatized that he creates Super Bunny as an imaginary hero to somehow save him from his life. He plays with ambulance and police cars because he remembers those vehicles were there during the accident. Now, obviously, this isn't true. This is just some creepypasta bullcrap that got passed around the internet. Like that Rugrats creepypasta that says Angelica actually has schizophrenia and was just imagining the babies, who, for the extra shock factor, had all died in various ways before they were born. Or any of its copycats, because people on the internet for some reason love to give dark meanings to innocent kid shows. Though, like I said, we're not really looking for the intentions of the creators, but rather the most likely explanation based on what's seen in the show. So, how does this theory hold up when you look at it from that perspective? Well, it still has some problems. The theory explains that the reason Max is always messing stuff up for Ruby is because he has brain injuries, but if you've seen the show, Max is actually pretty cunning. He's always got some crazy scheme going on, and usually when he does mess stuff up for Ruby, it's clearly intentional. It also says that Grandma molested Max, which is why he's mute, but if you've seen the show, Max isn't completely mute. He does say the occasional few-word sentences.
Max, hurry up. We have to go now.
Stay home.
So, yeah, there are some holes in this theory. Alternatively, some have suggested that the reason Max can't speak full sentences at 3.5 years old is because he's autistic, which could also explain why he seems to have a hard time understanding other people's feelings, especially Ruby's. And maybe Ruby has OCD, which is why she's so obsessed with everything being in order. But the parents' absence doesn't necessarily mean that they're dead. They could still be alive and just have something else going on. So let's look at some of those options. Maybe their parents have substance abuse problems and are in rehab or jail. Though if that was the case, you would think the grandma would have gained full custody since she's their only other known relative. Same with all the death theories. Or heck, the show mostly takes place during the morning or afternoon. Maybe they're at work, except if that's the case, these parents must work a lot because there's episodes that take place during nighttime where Ruby has to help Max get ready for bed. And episodes that take place during the holidays like Christmas and Easter, which for most people are days off. We never see Max and Ruby in school, which means that the episodes must all take place during some sort of school break. But I don't think that most parents would leave their 7-year-old daughter alone with their 3.5-year-old son during summer break, unless they're just super neglectful. Maybe they're not actually working, they're just always on vacation without their kids. Or maybe Ruby's Max's mother and Roger's his father and Grandma is actually Ruby's mother. Except this is definitely false, as shown by the family portrait. Plus, Ruby and Roger are only 7 years old. You could say something about human years versus rabbit years, but the rabbits in Max and Ruby are very much humanoid, so I'd assume they age like humans too. Unless Ruby's also lying about her age. This would also rule out the theory that the parents are gone because Max and Ruby are old enough rabbits to live on their own. I'm starting to think that Max and Ruby's parents are just deadbeats. But wait, look at this page from the book The Big Picture. It says that Ruby wanted to take a family picture. And who's the only person in the picture? It's Max, because he is the only family that Ruby has left. Except, oh wait, just kidding, they were actually there the whole time. In Season 6 of Max and Ruby, the parents were actually introduced as characters and end up having 2 more children, Grace and Oliver. Max can also suddenly speak full sentences, and we now see them going to school. As you can imagine, this just brought up more questions. Not only did the parents just show up out of nowhere, but once they did show up, they had 2 more kids? That's very suspicious. Maybe Max and Ruby actually died and now they're in heaven with their parents, except we still see all the other side characters, so did they die too? And why would they have to go to school if they're in heaven, and how would the parents have 2 more kids? It's pretty unlikely. And, you know, come to think of it, these parents don't match the ones seen in the family portraits, so they're adopted. Yep, case closed. Max and Ruby's biological parents were deadbeats, and after years of neglect, Child Protective Services finally got involved, and Max and Ruby are adopted by 2 new loving parents who decide to have 2 more kids. And Max speaks full sentences now because he's much happier now that he has 2 parents who actually love him. Boom, I solved it. But wait, then why do they still keep up the picture of their old parents?
I'm back. Wait, were you doing a theory video without me?
Maybe.
But that's my thing. You can't steal my thing. I literally host a show called Game Theory.
I know, but I thought that maybe I had to make my own theory for once.
Fine, but can I at least say one thing?
Sure, go ahead.
But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. See you next time.
Wait, this was still recording?